Hello everyone. In this second lecture on Wordsworth's Preface, we will continue our discussion of Wordsworth's Preface to the Lyrical Ballads. So, as you remember, the Preface to the Lyrical Ballads was published in the year 1800, though a small preface or a small introduction was published in 1798 also. And to the second edition of the Lyrical Ballads in 1800, 1800, the more detailed version of the preface was published. Now, Wordsworth tells us that when he wrote the poems which were published in Lyrical Ballads, he knew that he was writing poems of a different kind. He was writing poems which were different from the type of poems his readers were habituated to reading. The readers were habituated to the neoclassical poems of Alexander Pope and his followers, which were written throughout the 18th century. And suddenly Wordsworth presented the readers with different kind of poems. Poems which were based on the lives of the villagers. Poems which were written in a language which was actually used by the villagers. So the themes of the poems, the language of his poems were different from the poems of earlier times. Wordsworth expected that either his poems would be very much liked by the readers or they will be hated by the readers. He expected extreme response, either good or bad. He did not expect a medium sort of response. And the time has proved that the poems have become popular. Because this is the year 1800, Wordsworth says. The need for a second edition of the Lyrical Ballads has arrived, which means that the readers have liked the poems, which is why there is a need to a second edition of the poems. Now, when the second edition was published, some of the friends of Wordsworth asked him to explain his theory of poetry to readers in a preface to the Lyrical Ballads. In the beginning, Wordsworth was not in favor of writing a detailed preface, and he had two reasons for not writing a detailed preface. Wordsworth's first reason was that he did not want to force his views on his readers. He did not want to convince his readers to read his type of poems. He did not want to act like a salesman and promote his own product. And the second reason was that Wordsworth felt that a defense of his kind of poems will require a large space. Wordsworth had his own views about his type of poetry. If he really wanted to defend his theory of poetry, then it would require a separate treatise, a separate book, and a preface, an introduction will not be sufficient for explaining his theory of poetry. This is what Wordsworth felt. So, because of these two reasons, Wordsworth was not in favor of writing a detailed preface to the Lyrical Ballads. But he changed his mind and wrote this preface. It is because he realized that he will be presenting the readers with a new type of poetry without giving any introduction. He will be shocking them in a way. He did not want to shock his readers. He wanted to make the minds of his readers prepared to accept this new kind of poems. So that is why Wordsworth got rid of his earlier apprehensions and wrote this preface to the lyrical ballads. But he reminds the readers that his preface should be taken as a brief introduction to his poems and not as a systematic and elaborate defense of his theory of poetry. In his preface, he is telling the readers what type of poems they will be going to read. So, these poems are different and unusual from the earlier poems which were being written by the neoclassicals. So the readers would be warned beforehand what to expect, and thus they would be saved from disappointment. This is what Wordsworth expected. Then Wordsworth moves on to his choice of subjects for his poems. He makes it clear that he has chosen humble themes or rustic themes for his poems in the lyrical ballads. In short, Wordsworth has written about the village life. He has avoided the city life, which was exclusively dealt by the neoclassical poets. Wordsworth is writing about villages, the people living in villages, and nature, which is abundantly available in villages. The village people live in the midst of natural landscape, the natural things like rivers and mountains and the beauty of flowers and meadows and grasslands. Everything is available to them in plenty. Now, Wordsworth felt that because the villagers live in a close harmony with nature, because the villagers live in close contact with nature, their feelings are made noble because of that close contact with nature. And that is why he had chosen humble and rustic themes for his poetry. In other words, he felt that the elementary feelings of the human heart exist in a condition of greater simplicity in rustic conditions of life as compared to the city people who live in an artificial or sophisticated atmosphere. Secondly, the manners of rustic life are not sophisticated as they spring directly from the elementary feelings which are aroused by a close contact with nature. So, this is how Wordsworth defends his use of rustic life or villager's life for his poems. Next, Wordsworth talks about his choice of rustic language. Now, Wordsworth's poems are about villagers and their lives, their experiences and emotions. And the language which he has used for writing these poems is the actual language of the villagers, but this actual language is purified from its defections. He has not used the actual language of the villagers as it is in his poems. Because in the actual language of the rustic people, there may be defects such as use of slang, coarseness, faulty syntax. Some such defects are no doubt present in the rustic language. So Wordsworth has purified the rustic language from these defections and he has used this purified rustic language while writing his poems. Wordsworth says that the people living in rustic surroundings hourly communicate with the best objects from which the best part of human language is originally derived. Moreover, human feelings find an unsophisticated, simple, and unelaborated expression in rustic language. Wordsworth goes on to elaborate that as the rustic people move in a narrow circle, their language is more passionate, more vivid, and more forceful. He also suggests that the rustic language is more precise and more philosophical, and so it is more conducive to understanding than the artificial language which is spoken by the city people and the artificial language which is used by the poets who write about the city people. So, this is how Wordsworth defends his use of rustic language and his choice of humble subjects in his poetry. So, today we will stop here, and in the next lecture, I will be explaining Wordsworth's stages of composition of poetry. Thank you.